The truth is, there's no cheap seats in church. Every individual that walks into that room is deserving of the same experience. For the person who arrived late, the person who was first in the room, for the individual who had a great week, and the one who argued with the family in the car on the way to church, this video is all about why every person matters. Democracy for listeners.
There's two areas that are going to really affect the individual listener's experience of the sound in a room. It'll be firstly, the room shape and size, the length, the height, the width. Do we have balconies? Do we not? And general acoustic properties are going to interact with the sound system, and potentially we're going to add added reverberation. Sometimes we could kind of call this noise that gets in the way, that overtakes the noise we want people to hear. We may be causing dead spots. We may be causing frequencies and specific reflections to be made more distinct in certain areas. Secondly then, how does the system itself then actually cover this area? Do we have a sound system that's got the appropriate control to not only cover the audience with appropriate sound and intelligibility, but also how does that sound system then interact with the room itself as well? If your loudspeakers are not controlled, or we could say well behaved, what's going to happen is we might try to keep the energy on the audience, but actually we'll start spilling sound into other unwanted places. We might start exciting the reverberation in a way, or certain parts of the room in a way that we don't like. And all of this is going to give a sense of things in the room that we can't control anymore. And all of a sudden, our goal is to excite the congregation, but actually we're exciting the room in a pretty negative way.
This kind of affects everyone in their own unique way. For the senior pastor, if they struggle to hear themselves or they feel like they have to raise their voice for other people to hear them, they can only raise their voice so loud, right? So maybe they eventually lose their voice and that emotion is lost and they kind of shout to compensate. Or maybe they feel physically constrained to only a certain part of the stage because if I get too close to the front, my mic will feedback, or if I get over here, it sounds really weird and boomy. So they end up adjusting the way they talk just because of the sound system. And for the worship leader, maybe that looks totally different. Maybe they feel like they're constantly having to turn things up in their monitors because there's so much energy coming back from the room onto the stage. So whether that be a wedge or an in-ear monitor or something, they're fighting the PA just to be able to hear what they're doing. And for the guy who's mixing, the audio engineer, you've sat there and tried every filter you can, and you've tried to adjust what you can at your console, and you're doing your best, but no matter what you do, you're still putting all that energy in places where it shouldn't be. So you're creating problems that you can't solve with a simple turn of a knob. And it's not just about making you happy at your one position, but trying to give the best representation to the rest of the room. And you don't really have a good grasp of what everyone is getting when your loudspeaker does not have good directivity and you don't have good control of the system in general.
Ultimately, what it means is the listener is asking too many questions at a point where they should just be receiving a message. And what happens is the brain's going to go into overload and they'll just turn off. When you do this as well, what's interesting is people get distracted. So maybe they start, eating sweets or turning the pages in the Bible. All of a sudden the noise floor starts going up because people are distracted. And the whole problem gets worse and worse and worse.
You spend a lot of time fighting fires instead of creating art, instead of capturing the purest essence of what's being led from the stage. It causes frustration, uncomfortability. People may be even afraid to step out, to speak up, because they've had some bad experiences of it not landing, it going wrong. And that tension and that struggle isn't something that a worship environment should have to deal with. To solve these complex problems takes due diligence. It takes time, and it shouldn't be rushed. Each communication method and room size requires a tailored solution. It's not a cookie-cutter approach. It's what's appropriate for you. You need an effective and efficient system, where the goal is to minimize the excitation in the room and to bring direct energy to the congregation.
A couple of steps maybe to always think about. Firstly, we have to make sure we ask the right questions. Maybe we need to just check, how loud does this system need to go? Are we talking reinforcing a choir lightly, or are we trying to do high-level contemporary worship? What areas of the room do we need to consider? How wide do the congregation sit? How deep do the congregation sit? Do they always sit in the same place? Do the seating arrangements change? Maybe there's known areas of the room that are problems, and we should always ask the question, is there known seats? Is there known issues with an existing sound system that we can learn from? When we roll all of this together, there's 3 P's in terms of how we maybe put this into action that are really simple to follow. First, pick the right speaker. Second, put it in the right place. And third, point it in the right direction. And if we do all of this well, we're well on the way to designing a great sound system.
So, how do I pick the right speaker? One of the first questions to ask is, does this loudspeaker go loud enough for what I'm trying to do? Do I have enough headroom to achieve what I want the system to do without feeling like I'm at the very max of it? And one of the next questions, does it have the right frequency response? Does it go as low as I want it to? Can I get that low frequency out of my main system or my subsystem that really helps me transfer what's going on stage, that energy kind of right here in your chest? And, maybe I don't need a subsystem depending on the room. Maybe my tops go low enough. All that kind of relationship between the mains and the subs and the outfills, we need to consider what kind of plays nice together for the space. And obviously a huge thing to consider is speech intelligibility. Can I understand what's happening in the vocal range on stage? So a speaker's dispersion characteristics kind of help tell us what degree of coverage that we can expect intelligibility to happen. So that allows us to make the proper decision for, do I need a wider box in this area, or do I need a more narrow box to just put energy into this seating? Because the intelligibility is paramount. We can have the best sound system in the world that has really great low frequency production and that feels really awesome, but if you can't understand the vocal, what's the point? D&B has this obsession with pattern control, because if we can control the pattern of a loudspeaker, that lets us control where sound is going and where it isn't going. And that is what gives us headroom and intelligibility. So if we're not spilling energy onto the stage, back into our microphones, onto the reflective surfaces, then we're keeping more people inside the direct sound field, giving them the intended experience. A lot of times people think they need a lot of speakers to do that, but you can actually do it with less when you work with cabinets that have great pattern control and great off-axis frequency response, because it doesn't just matter what a speaker sounds like directly on axis. As we move left to right of that speaker, tonally, it should sound the same. So that gives us some freedom in where we place these speakers in the room.
So step 2, putting the speaker in the right place. This is such a key component. If we want our congregation to truly connect with where they're seeing things happen, we have to make sure the sound comes from the same place as well. So in an example of maybe a modern contemporary church that are quite often wide, where we're trying to move the congregation as close to the stage as possible for an intimate experience, if we want them to hear the sound from the place they're seeing it, that's maybe a different way of placing speakers to a long, maybe traditional cathedral. That's a very different shape, and the congregation sitting in a very different orientation to where they see things happening. If we think about how high we place a speaker, maybe we want to place a speaker as high as possible so that it doesn't become a visual distraction. But we also want to place the speaker as low as possible to, again, connect to the height of what we see happening in front of us, but also just to get the appropriate dispersion and coverage from the front row to the back row. By raising the speaker higher, we even the level distribution front to back. But if we have the speaker too high, we might miss some coverage at the front of the room. When we consider left to right, we may be having a wide room that need to place multiple speakers to cover that wide room. Whereas in a long room, where maybe long and thin room, we actually need to place more speakers placed at different locations down the room, as opposed to one central location. So in all of this, we need to pick the speaker position that allows us to adequately cover the room, but also to engage the congregation to the place they see things happening in front of them.
Finally, you need to point the speaker in the right direction. Correctly aiming your loudspeaker should help the system blend together and sort of disappear within that image. So no matter where you are, you're not necessarily looking here and focusing to something way over there. So if the angle is wrong, you might make that image shift a bit. And also you could be putting energy where you don't want it, maybe onto a glass wall or a reflective surface. So as the listener, we should see and hear the source kind of connected together, because if this is wrong, our ear-brain system kind of has a hard time connecting what we see and what we hear, and we're just making the system work harder. If we can fix that, then all of a sudden our brain has an easier time listening and we can listen for longer.
So can you prove that this is going to work for you before you invest? The answer is yes. D&B's software workflow holds the accurate prediction tools you need to ensure there's no guesswork, to take out the hope it works this time, and to ensure that you can invest with confidence using the same software that's used by huge tours, stadiums, venues all over the world. Ensures that you've got evenness across every single frequency band, that the interactions are as they should be, and that you know what to expect. Without any hesitance, you can confidently say, this will work. Later on in the series, we're going to look at some very commonplace, real-life applications in houses of worship. We're going to unpack the suite of tools that D&B offers to help you install with confidence.
So when we get these design principles right, what that means is we can be confident that the audience is covered. We can be confident that we've got the level that we need. We can be confident that people are going to clearly hear the words and enjoy great sound in music. And it's going to set us free from having to worry about these things to some extent. And more importantly, it's going to set the congregation free. They're going to be able to engage truly in what's going on. An example of this would be a UK festival called Soul Survivor, in a very big marquee with a very elaborate stage design that was a very hard space to cover. But when we picked the right speakers, we put them in the right place and we pointed them in the direction, and we got this right, we could clearly see the impact on every person in the room, from old to young, from people sitting on the side to people sitting in the middle, from the eager people at the front to the people that maybe weren't intending quite to engage at the back. All of them were engaged, all of them were involved. Why? Because the sound system pulled them into the message. It pulled them into the core of the emotion of what was going on at that event.
So a good sound system sets us up to win. For the mix engineer, they're able to work with more precision and get down to the nitty-gritty of the mix and really do what they want to do. And this helps them work with the worship team better because they can be more creative with the dynamics of the service or what type of instrumentation they do, knowing it'll translate. And the mix just becomes more natural. The spoken word delivers, and you get a more intimate connection with the stage. You feel like whoever's speaking is speaking to you and not speaking to a big reverberant hall.
With D&B, a lot of the worries are taken away so that you can focus on what's happening on stage. Nothing is added, nothing's taken away. The heart of the message is delivered true and faithful, so that the true essence of every source is delivered to every individual. The final video in our core value section is about investing with confidence. We'll pass on our wisdom for how you can do that as an individual and as an organization.